Back in the blue room with Greg Twigg. All right, let's look at layers with a little more detail. I'm just going to pick up where I was. I know this is something that you guys don't have. I'm not including this file for you, but you can easily make it having watched the previous layers video. So I have 3 layers right now, and I'm going to go through some of the timeline details of the layers and some management stuff, this will be a breeze. So I do have this one layer that I left called light gray solid 1. I didn't name it in the layers window. So what happens if you do create a solid and then you did not name it, and then you realize down the road you're like, oh shoot, I want to rename that? It's very easy. You can just select the layer and then hit return on your keyboard, and it'll highlight that text. This is kind of commonplace with other applications. Not all of them. Usually you might be used to just double clicking on the name to rename it. If I double click on that name, it opens the layer up in the layers tab, which is not really that awesome. So you got to get used to hitting the return key. That opens that up, and now I'm just going to type in BG for background. So now my background is identified through a name, and that's really easy. Or maybe perhaps it's a color, or whatever. There's lots of ways for you to identify it, but organization, it's really great. Sorry, I just hit the mic. I'm going to lock that background layer. We talked about that in the last video. That way I don't futz with it. You can also do this in the project window, where you see the solids are all located here in that folder. But notice I changed my layer here to say BG, but in the project window, it still has the original file name from when I made it. It's kind of confusing. No big deal, but what's happening here is that there are 2 ways for you to identify your layers in the timeline, and I don't know, this has never been useful for me, so I'm not sure why they made it. But if I click on the little label at the top of that stack of layers called layer name, I can change it back to its original names, which are still layer 1 and 2 for that. They're in brackets, I don't know why. But BG turns into light gray solid. So if I went to here and I hit return and I typed in BG, now if I were to click on that same layer name, source name, it knows that the source, which is in the project window, is called BG, so there's no change there. So you can change your layer names in 2 different places. One of them's kind of temporary and one of them's permanent. Just something you should know. But what if I'm working and I say, well, I like what's going on with these solids, except for this orange one, I want it to be a different color. How do I change that? You can't double click on it to change it because that opens up the layer tab. So you got to understand that it's a layer and it has a pathway through After Effects of being created, and that was from the layer menu. So the second option now here is called layer settings. If I open up layer settings, it takes me back to that original window that popped up when I wanted to create that layer. So here I could rename it if I needed to. I can change its dimensions if I need to, or I can change its color. So if I wanted to just make it a little more deeper orange, I just change that color and hit OK, and now there it is. It's been done. So the layer solid settings is something that you should get comfortable with going back to as well. Shortcut keys, Shift, Command, Y. To make a new solid, it's just Command, Y. Boom. You can see all these things. They list them along the sides of them, which is convenient, and it's good for you, and it's good for me. Now let's just say I wanted to have another solid just like the one I have here, but on the right hand side instead of the left. And we're going to get into a little bit of management of layers here. Several ways I can do that. I could ultimately just take the layer from the project window and pull it into this comp, and now I have a second version of that same layer Can't see it. Why? Because of the layer hierarchy. The blue is currently obscuring it. So this might be a good time for me to turn that layer off temporarily so that I can see the orange solid that's behind it, and then I could just move it over relatively close to that location. I can turn my blue back on and I can see it now. What would I want to do if I wanted to make sure that those things were in like sort of more symmetrical spread or position? I could turn on my action safe and my center marks and guides like we went over a few videos ago, which is the same as hitting my title action safe. Or I could turn on my grid, any of these things. I'm just going to turn on the action safe right now and say, oh, look at that. It's right on the edge of that line, which means this one is a little bit further. I'll just use my arrow keys and nudge it over, and I can guarantee that we're pretty symmetrical right now. I'm going to hit quote to get rid of those things. So cool. So now I have 4 layers, and I did that through taking one of the same layers and dragging it in. Sometimes it might be easier for you to do something where you duplicate that layer. So I'm going to select the new one that I had just done, and I'm going to go to edit, duplicate, and that shortcut command is Command D. And so now I just did duplicate, and it gave me another version. It's in the exact same spot as the previous one. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag it up and have it be the topmost layer, which means that the blue one will not obscure it, and I can just kind of move that over. Maybe I'll hit quote again and see where my center point is, just to make sure that I can get that centered as close as possible. That's pretty good. Good enough for the people I hang out with. So pretty easy to just start to duplicate these layers. And I've already got a neat geometric form going on just by, basically making two solid layers, but then having some color harmony, some position harmony, and now we're ready to make a move and stuff, which we're not going to do yet. Sit tight. So if we look at the layers in the timeline, I'm going to kind of go through just some of what these switches are here. We do have this little arrow that you can kick down, and that opens up something called the transform properties. If you open up that arrow, then it shows us all of our transform properties: anchor point, position, scale, rotation, opacity. This is where we're going to get into in like 2 more videos where we actually start animating stuff. So I'm not going to worry about that now. But then there's this colored box. This colored box identifies layers by their type. And right now, what I have set in my preferences is that solids and layers like this are all going to be red. But if I brought in audio, it might be light cyan. If I brought in a video clip, it might be brown, right? So that's what's assigned by default, but I could easily say, I have to unlock it. Hey, my background layer, I'm going to change you to be cyan. And so now it has a different identity to it, just a way for you to kind of help differentiate layers while you work. It's not necessary, but if you're super organized, then that could be helpful for you. Here's the stacking order, so you know what layer is what, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Obviously, your name. And then we have this little guy, and it's a dude peeking up over a wall, and his nose is hanging over the wall. It's so cute. This is a way for you to clear up your timeline and give yourself less visual noise while you work in the timeline, not on the canvas. So as opposed to the eyeball, which makes things disappear in the canvas, this little guy, if I were to take maybe all of those and I hit the button, nothing happens because there's a master button. But I just signified to After Effects that I would like to hide or shy. It's called shying. I'd like to shy those 3 layers. And then there's the master button up here above. There's the guy peeking over the wall with his nose hanging over. If I click on that now, the layers just go away in the timeline. They're still visible up here in the canvas. However, it just gives me the ability to focus on a couple layers, because you might have 52 layers at some point and it gets out of control. You just want to work on 3 of them or something like that. You can shy all the other layers, they just go away. To bring them back, you just unclick that guy and they're back. And if you just want to take them off and not have that happen, you can just click them off there. This is the continual transformations and rasterization button. This is only helpful if you're working with vector files that you've brought in from like Illustrator, or if you're using other compositions within a composition, you want to keep it. You'll find out later. I'll give it to you later. You're going to get it later. This is your quality of each layer. So right now I'm on fine quality. It's a nice slick line. And if I click on it, it turns into a curve, which means that we have gone into, oh shoot, I forget what the curve is, but it's, maybe I'll let you research that. I just never use it. And then this is draft quality. The draft quality is going to dumb down the quality of a layer without you having to dumb down the entire resolution of the comp itself. So it's the equivalent of taking it from full resolution to about half or third, but you can do it on layers themselves. So that's what those two are. The third one, the curve, I got to do my homework. I should have been ready for that, but I'm not. I just never use it. We have a motion blur. We have our adjustment layer feature, and then we have our 3D cubes. These are things we'll get into later, not going to worry about it. Same with the parenting and the linking. This is something that is just more advanced. We're just not there yet. The layer itself can be selected in different ways. You can click on the name. You can see how it highlights them with the little handles. You can do that from the timeline. You can also click off of it to deselect it. Sometimes you have to deselect. Actually, a lot of times you're going to have to deselect. And that can be as simple as clicking off in the empty space here, as long as there is some in the timeline. Maybe you just have so many layers and there's no empty space in the timeline to click on. So you might be going, where do I click to get off of that? You can click next to the name between the number and the color, and it'll just unselect itself. Or you could select or deselect things in the canvas. So if I click off of the canvas, it deselects. If I click on something on the canvas, it can select it. I can also select it here in the timeline itself. So I can grab that stuff that looks like ground beef and select it there. So the other way to deselect would be edit, deselect all, which is Shift Command A. And I love that keyboard shortcut. I use it all the time. Get used to it. It's great because you need to deselect things sometimes just to get rid of the dots because they're sort of visually irritating, and also just so you don't affect the wrong layer when you're adding an effect or doing something like that. So that is selecting, deselecting, duplicating, arranging, a little bit of hierarchy, change, and well, I think that's it for this video. We're going to do one more video on layers, and it's going to deal with some even more specifics. Then for real, we'll get into some more exciting stuff. All right, thanks. See you the next time.